Hello, screenwriters, and welcome to Writing for Screens. Ask me almost anything. My name is Glenn Gers, and I come to you every Monday through Friday, if I can make it, at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Most of the time, I am doing the Screenwriting Step-by-Step project in which I am letting you watch me share my screen as I write a script in order to talk about the process, the nuts and bolts writing process. But every once in a while, I'm getting a lot of questions. I just take an hour and I answer questions. The biggest answers, though, are on my channel in these first 3 playlists. Screenwriting Essentials, Screenwriting Tools, Skills, and Craft, and The Process, Being a Writer. Those are the first 3 you're going to see if you go to my main page on this channel, and they each have many little 10-minute videos which take on a particular practical question. For example, dramatic action, instinct, flashbacks, genre. These are all things that I've tried to boil down what I know into very practical, simple steps that I hope will be helpful. They're very flexible. There is not a single unified theory. I do not have a plan for you because you have to make your own plan. Figure out your own path based in who you are and what you want to do and what you can do. All that stuff means that every single writer has to figure out their own path. All I can do is give you tools and skills and some process to help you figure out what works for you. If there's anything I say that doesn't work for you, don't do it. It's not required. The universe will not fall apart. There is not a proper official screenwriting rule book that you have to follow. Hello, Nathan. Hello, 99 Precinct. Hello, Mohammed. Hello, Orfe. Good to see all of you here. Today, the first question that I'm going to get into was yesterday. In yesterday's Ask Me Almost Anything, Kelvin asked a question I wasn't quite ready to answer in full because it's a biggie. He said, do you have any tips on preventing plot holes? And I thought, that's a good question. Let's think about that because my first instinct was, do I have any tips on that? Because it's not something I'm conscious of. I'm just always trying to make sure that there aren't any, but I never thought about how I do that. So I wanted to take a day to think about that. And now I've got to say, the very first thing is the outline is where you best work on the plot, where you make sure the plot is interesting, where you make sure it doesn't have any holes. You want to work in the outline. For those of you who don't know what I mean by an outline, or don't know how I feel or how I think you might try making one, there's no particular official way. I would suggest you watch these 2 videos. The first is Why Outline, where I talk about what an outline does, how it works. An outline is just a list of scenes. It is not a treatment. It is not in prose. It is not for other people. It's just something that you want to work in, and it does not take away the creativity. It's actually a place to be creative in. If you want my particular way to do it, I did a video called How to Outline. And I really suggest you watch those 2. They are chock full of useful tidbits. But the main thing I do have to say about this is when you're thinking about your plot, you need to step back into the outline, into that kind of thinking where you are saying, all right, I need to think in terms of this scene goes to this scene, goes to that scene, and then skips over here. That kind of stuff you can't do on the page. You need to step back, what some people call the 30,000 foot view or the 10,000 foot view, however many feet above it you are. The point is you want to look at it in scenes, in terms of structural elements, without all the decoration that is a screenplay. You just want to know what's the essential action, which I would point out is one of the reasons you might want to also look at the video, think in scenes, because that's how you do plot. You figure out how to break it up into scenes. Yes, it is. It is a tough question and a good one. Hello, Maratlatosa. Hello, Quintista. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about that is that one of the things about thinking about plot is you need to separate plot from all the texture and detail, and think that basically you want to think about the difference between story and plot. That will really help you a lot when you are figuring out if you have any plot holes, is to say the story is what happens to the people in the story. It's their lives, their experience, their events in the order that they happen to them. That's what the story is. Now that same story can be told many different ways. So the plot is how you are going to tell it. Are you going to start at the end and then have a cliffhanger scene from the second act and then jump back to the beginning? Are you going to start with their childhood and show how they get to every place? The plot is how you decide which scenes you're going to use to show which information in which actions in the plot. That's what the plot is. The plot is which scenes you are making this story out of. Hello, Jean. Hello, Di. Hello, D-Real. Good to see all of you. So that's the next thing I would say is when you're trying to figure out if you've got any plot holes or if your plot is working or if it's good, the first thing you have to do is think about the two layers of plot. The first one is what actually happened. Like if you take something, and I don't want to do too many spoilers here, but if you take something like The Prestige, in the last 20 minutes of that, there are some big reveals. Now, if you actually told yourself the story of The Prestige, you would know some of those things and you say, well, this guy is doing this and this guy is doing this. Those things are not revealed until the end of the plot. But you first need to know how that happened, what it is that you're trying to tell to decide when to tell which parts. So you are talking about the story happening to the characters as they live it, which means it's always in the right order of beginning to end, chronologically as they walk through it in their lives. That's the first thing you need to know. What actually happened? If you were talking about 2001, I'm not going to worry too much about spoilers here. The thing you actually want to say is, okay, I'm trying to tell the story of how these aliens, that's weird because they're not the main characters, although in some ways they really are. These invisible aliens send these devices to planet Earth at certain key moments in evolution, which are going to allow or push humanity to take a step forward in evolution and civilization. That's the story. And then within that, there are several sub-stories of different people's experiences encountering these aliens. Well, that's then you have to say, okay, well, now I have to tell this person's story, then I have to tell this guy's story, then I have to tell that guy's story. And then you think, well, how do I start? Like, the last section is about the astronauts who are taking a spaceship to Jupiter, and their ship, because their ship computer is a character. So then you think, okay, how am I going to introduce this? Do I show them having the launch party and everyone's explaining the mission? Or do I just cut to, as he does, that ship is on its way and these people are all alone? Because that's what you want to emphasize. That is the plot. The story is they made a plan, they built a ship, they sent the ship, they left it off the ship, all that stuff. You're going to skip that in the plot. Okay, so that's the next thing you have to know about plot holes is you have to understand the story and the plot. Hello, Kirby. Having done that, I personally suggest that you do what they call a plot pass. They don't call it, I'm calling it that. When you go through the script or the outline, from beginning to end, tracking one element, like to say, I need to track the cops in this story. So you just go through it and you try not to focus on anything except those scenes which have the cops in them. That is another really useful thing, is to say, okay, I'm going to do this for the plot. I'm not going to worry about the characters. I'm not going to worry about the style. I'm just going to talk about right now, have I got scenes that explain or lay out and the plot and how those plot twists happen and how those changes and developments in the plot happen? Is there a scene where that is made clear? Another way to look at this is something that I talked about in the video, building character arcs. which is that you want to sometimes take just one aspect of the story and follow that through the story, ignoring everything else. For instance, you've got one particular character. You just say, I'm just going to follow their story, their experience in this plot, to make sure that you don't have any holes, any places where you jump. Like if they need to have a revelation where they decide to quit the gang, you have to make sure that you're showing when that happens and what caused it. And maybe you're going to show it by showing us see it. Maybe you're going to show it by having him explain it to someone later. But somehow or other you have to say, where do I have the part where that happens in this set of scenes? That's the other way to avoid plot holes, is to follow each character and make sure that their story makes sense if you weren't paying attention to anything else. I would say one of the main places that plot holes happen is when you are thinking of the audience and not of the experience of the characters. So that's the thing, because one of the main things, and by the way, those of you who are here, got 15 people watching right now. If you guys got questions, it's an Ask Me Anything. Feel free. Right now we're talking about plot holes. So one of the questions is, what actually is a plot hole, right? People talk about it very knowledgeably. It's a plot hole. That doesn't mean something isn't believable or realistic. That's not a plot hole. That's frankly a matter of opinion. What a plot hole would be really is where a consequence or a step or an action is missing from the sequence of events, from the plot. Where if you know in theory, where there's a part that either isn't making sense because of some other part of the story that is established, or something that you would think is going to happen from that, the consequence isn't there, the question is not answered. Those are the things that create plot holes. The tricky thing about this, as for every single thing in screenwriting, is there's no actual rule or test or formula for this. How to avoid a plot hole? You can't check, do they all contain 3.5 gallons of plot? No, you don't know. There's no way to know. All you can do is say, if I am tracking each character and each element of this plot that I want to track, as I said, making an outline where you just look at the scenes and say, okay, this is where we say they have to cross the moat to get into the castle, but the moat is full of dragons. And then so they decide to fly over it. And then the hole is, how do they fly? Do they find a device for it? Or, that's a plot hole. But the tricky thing about that is that what you're really talking about is the what they call logic, the plot logic, story logic. Now, what's tricky about this is it's not real logic. It's the logic of that particular story. For example, in some stories, you would say, if someone does you wrong, you must seek revenge. That's the way this world operates. In others, someone does you wrong, you go to the police. Very different. So one of the things you have to do is figure out the rules of this world, and then you have to balance that with the rules of the known universe. For instance, if something is doing something that is physically impossible, in our world, you would have to either explain that physics are different, or you would have to explain why this thing is breaking those rules. But the other kind of logic is what I would call movie logic, that generally in movies, especially if you are talking about a genre of movies or movies from a particular place or time, there will be logics. There will be, like, if two characters meet, you know that they are going to have a romance and that they are going to come together at the end, because that is the logic of certain kinds of Hollywood movies. There is not an actual plot hole test. I would suggest, if you feel comfortable, telling someone the story, just the story, not reading them or making them read it, just a list of the events in order that you are telling them, to see if they can track what's happening. This is a tricky thing because A, you may be a lousy verbal storyteller. B, they may be a bad listener. There's a lot of things that can go wrong with this, but if you don't mind trying it out with a lot of ground rules for whether or not you have to listen to what they say about your plot, etc., it's worth trying. It's not a bad idea. Try it out on some people. Then the other thing that you want to do is you want to remember that you're not showing that avoiding plot holes does not mean showing every step. Very often, something will be a plot hole, a mystery. How the heck is that happening? Until later in the story, you'll find out how it happened. That's not a plot hole. That's just suspense. That's just mystery. That's just excitement, There's no reason for everything to be told to the audience all the time. That is not how you avoid plot holes. That's frankly how you bore the audience if you tell them everything. So the one thing I would say is that remember that what you're trying to do is find the important things and make sure that they are told. But you do not have to show every step of a process. And the other thing that leads to is a story I once told about Paul Newman. He was working on the movie Color of Money, which is a fine movie if you ever get a chance to see it. He was working with the writer Richard Price and the director Martin Scorsese, and they were working through the script, like talking about it. The script existed, but they were doing the things that actors and directors and writers do, where they talk through it and ask questions and question how things are done to try and get it to better shape. And there was apparently a plot problem. There was a plot hole, a thing that just didn't follow, didn't make sense, wasn't possible. And they worked on it for weeks, and they could not figure out a way to solve it without wrecking the rest of the story, because that's usually the problem with plot holes. You can solve a plot hole. Can you do it without wrecking the rest of your structure? So at a certain point, Paul Newman just said, this is going to be our little secret. And they just never fixed it. And no one knows. No one cares. It doesn't matter. I don't know what it is. Nobody does. Our little secret is a very important part of making any kind of story, because the truth is, you don't always have to fix every problem. Some problems just sort of glance off the audience and get forgotten. Some of them don't even get noticed. Most of them, because the audience is paying attention to the flow of the main characters and their story. So that is the key, I would say. Focus on the character and story to solve your plot holes. Because if you don't get every little, how did he get from place A to place B fast enough? No one will really be worried about that if the flow of the story is making sense emotionally and logically for those main characters that we are seeing. That's really the key. Our little secret of all writing is it has to be satisfying to the story, not necessarily to actual logic. It has to fulfill the flow and logic, the needs and weaknesses of the characters. That is when you don't have plot holes. Otherwise, every plot has holes. Seriously. The key is you want to try and minimize them. You want to try and now and then decide when and where you're going to explain them if you have to, or show that step. And you're going to see which steps can I skip, because that is really the key to writing. How much can I skip? Character is more important than plot. Those of you who have watched me a lot know that I hate competitions of any kind. Character is more important than plot. No, I would say that plot is coming out of character. That character defines the plot. Is it actually just more important? No, but because in one way you don't even know who the character is except through the plot. But character and plot, character and story, they are an endless cycle feeding each other. The story only exists because the characters have their needs and ways of working. The characters are only understood by us because the story is showing us stuff. So it goes back and forth. But the answer is yes. In a sense, character is everything. Character is how you define all those character arcs and all the famous Glenn Gur's 6 questions. That's all coming from character. Who is it about? Hi, Jose. Hunter, hi. Do most screenwriting softwares provide outlining? No, I mean, they will provide you with ways to look at your story in terms of, many of them now have some kind of note card version or block version. That is not necessarily providing an outline. One of the main things you need to do, and I cannot urge you enough to watch this video and this video. They really answer all questions about outlines for me, as far as I'm concerned. Because what I would say is, many script writing softwares will provide some form of abstracting to a scene level, to a story unit level. But that is phenomenal. That's relatively new. It's only been the last couple of years that they've done that. Some do, some don't. You'd have to check how they do it. You don't need fancy software to do an outline. I do my outlines often in word processing, and the outline technique that I teach is done in word processing, because one of the things is, you have to remember, an outline is in order. It's scenes in order, a list of scenes in an order. That's a document. That's fine. You can do it. I also sometimes use Scrivener. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you are thinking in scenes and working in scenes. Sometimes the software will, sometimes the software won't. Okay. How important is character motivation in terms of plot? It's super duper important. It's 100. If you don't tell the character why a character is doing something, would that count as a plot hole? That is a tricky thing. In theory, you don't need to tell them why, because you will have established the character's reason when you are introducing the character. So therefore, they know why someone is doing it. Now and then they'll do something. I mean, last night was another episode of the last few of Better Call Saul. There was a 30-minute sequence in which Saul was doing something, step by step, every little step of this little caper he was doing. And the question was, why? Why is he doing this? We didn't know. I knew he knew what he was doing, so I was going along with the ride. I knew that Saul is the sort of person who doesn't do things for no reason, and that he was in a certain situation, so I was willing to take 30 minutes of somewhat inexplicable actions. The answer is, character motivation comes from my favorite questions, which are, who is it about? What do they want? Why can't they get it? What do they do about that? Those questions are the character motivation, and they are the plot. In other words, if this character wants something, and they have an obstacle, why can't they get it? And they do something, that's the plot. That is the plot of your movie. With this little section in the middle, why can't they get it? What do they do about it? Why doesn't that work? Endlessly repeating. You can have that series of, they try this thing, they can't get it because of this obstacle. They do this thing, it doesn't fully work, or it makes things worse, or whatever. And so they have to go back to, oh, that's an obstacle, and therefore I will do this action. That is the plot. That's it. That's your plot machinery. So the answer is, if you don't tell a character, the audience, why a character is doing something, that's fine, as long as they basically know what the character is trying to do in an overall sense. If they're acting way mysteriously out of character, you do want to indicate that they have a reason. But in theory, they won't be doing something that the audience doesn't understand if you have created the character with a motivation. Hi, Glenn and everybody. Hi, I write. I remember you talking about world building at some point. It was important. I'm going to put this one off because I'm actually going to. I have written and I'm planning to record and release sometime in the next couple of months a full 10-minute video about world building. So that one I'm gonna hang on. I don't want to take up our time now for something that I'm just going to do a whole video on. I hope that's okay. Even if it's not, it's happening. I write fantasy screenplay. It's set in medieval ages, and I don't know how I should tell it to the audience. Well, it depends. What do you mean? If you mean how to tell it that it's in the Middle Ages, you just show it to them. Just say, here, look, there's a guy, he's got a cart and a horse, and he doesn't know how television works, that kind of thing. Like, if you have elements of the fantasy that you need to explain, that's where you get into exposition. which luckily I did a video on. Exposition, Your New Best Friend, is a video where I talk a lot about how do you get information to the audience? How do you tell them what country it is, what era it is, who's the boss of this town, what's the problem of this system, whatever it is. That's what we call exposition, which is information you need the audience to get. One of the things I'm a little concerned about here about doing these videos is eventually I'm going to just be saying, watch this video, watch that video, watch this video. But that's actually the goal. The goal is for me not to come on the live stream, but for the library of videos to be there for you to watch at whenever time you want to. And frankly, you should watch all of them so that you have them in your head. Oh, this is this and this is that. That is my personal advice. Let me know, Di, if I answered the question that you wanted answered, because I'm not sure about it. How did ancient playwrights like Sophocles learn to be great storytellers? They didn't have the books and gurus they have today. Well, there's a couple of things about that. First of all, don't know that they needed them because they were telling their stories. Partly they were just talented. They just said, oh, I can see this good way to tell the story. But they also had clearly, I don't know exactly how ancient playwriting business went, but I suspect that if there was I don't even know how the mechanisms of the theater, because the theater was a religious ritual at that time, as well as a social ritual. And so I'm not sure how you became a playwright. How softly, did you go to the playwright division of the church and say, hey, I want to write a play? And was it a church? I don't know that. You should research that if you want to know as far as how ancient Greek theater worked. But one thing I bet is there was an existing group of people who put on plays, and if you wanted to be in that business, you would join that group, usually as an apprentice of some kind. You must start out, well, you wouldn't be putting up chairs because they were giant stone slabs on the side of a mountain, but you wouldn't be handing out programs, but you know what I'm saying. You would be working with the theater and learning from the person who's currently the pro playwright. And then you would say, I have a feeling about this. There was actually one book at the time, Aristotle's Poetics. That's a iffy book. It's thousands of years old, so therefore a lot of the things he says just don't apply anymore. It's really important to remember when you go to the greats of history, you're also going to literally a culture, a civilization that does not exist anymore and may not apply to us. Are there truths and rules and dramatic principles that always apply? I don't know. I cannot say for sure that I believe in that. I believe that many things are useful tools. Let's just see if I have this. Yeah. Rules are tools. The way that a good writer works is that you learn as many rules as you can, as many formulae, as many ways that other people do things, and then you say, how can I use that for the thing I feel like doing? That's what I would say about the ancients. Yeah, what can I say? Hi, Diego. Okay. So, hi, Cheyenne. You've told us a lot about writing. Do you have time to make a video or video series about how to conceive an entire series with the brief episode breakdowns for the first season? Yes, kind of. Yes, kind of. Which is, as I finish the step-by-step project, one of the things I will be doing is making not a episode-by-episode breakdown, but that document which talks about the full season and the full series. I will also be putting on my website at some point fairly soon, I hope. I'm going to try and get to this. I wrote a pilot script for a series called Revelator, which was a complex sci-fi thriller story. I only wrote the pilot, so then I wrote a document which tried to lay out the principles of the rest of the series. And I will post those both on my website at some time soon, so hopefully that will give you an example of how that works. Then number 2 from Cheyenne, I am outlining a novel series using a TV structure as a guide. That's actually a cool idea. It's not bad. It would be really helpful to get your insight on how to create a story that's going to be broken down by episode/book. Yes, what I would say is the first thing you want to do is do what I talked about in Take art apart. Watch that video because I talked in detail about how I think you can do this, which is there are so many different ways to do that. Like the episode structure of Mr. Robot and the episode structure of Fleabag are just drastically different. The series, the seasons, the approach, it's also different. Community is very different from Fleabag too. So what I would say is you can't say there's an absolute system for any of these. And by the way, there are no rules about this. There is no proper format for your plan for the series. The other thing I would suggest is be careful about over-planning a series. The way that the business works is if they buy the pilot, and even if they were to not suggest any rewrites of the pilot at all, which are about 1,000,000 to 1 odds, they are going to want to have producers and staff, writers, all come together in a room with the showrunner, who probably won't be you because you've never had that experience, and they need experienced people because we're talking about multi-million-dollar operations here. What they would do is that they would break down the season and break down each episode in the group led by the showrunner. So therefore, if you detail everything of every episode, you're doing their job for them without their input. And they want to have their input. The company, other people, they are going to have input, and you are going to have to shape your series based on your needs and their needs. So, plus, they're going to come up with some great stuff you never thought of. So all of that would suggest that, if possible, roughly sketch the shape of the show, but don't get into every single episode all the way. You can if you want, doesn't hurt, but I wouldn't. I would just point out the reality of creating a series is you do that in collaboration with other people, some of whom are paying you. Hi, Matthew. Okay. Hold on. Let me just going to take a second to screenshot some of these things so that I can put them into the description of this episode. How do you prevent boredom within your story? Is it a plot problem or a character problem? Both. Is it just the subjective nature of the viewer? Is it production value? You can't control production value, so don't worry about it. I think that one of the things about boredom is if people are involved in the story and the story is progressing, they probably aren't going to be bored. I mean, some people will, because some people won't like it that much. I was just talking about Better Call Saul. I enjoyed it a great deal. I have a good friend who's a great writer. He can't stand it. He thinks it's boring as all get out. So what are you going to do? But if the thing you want to do when you prevent boredom, I mean, preventing boredom should kind of be your full-time job. You should be thinking about every scene as, how is this not boring? That's kind of a writer's work, to say, what about this is interesting? If it is repetitive, or if it is not a big enough move from a previous scene, or if it's boring, then try and think about a way not to do that, to avoid it, to get around it. Is it plot? Yes. Is it character? Yes. Both. Both of those should be pushing us towards that endless series of questions. That's really what you want. You want the audience, to be asking questions. What is he going to do about that? Like if you have given them these 6 questions, I don't want to make it into like a slogan, but it kind of is, that if you are constantly asking these questions, it won't be boring, because the question will be, what do they want and why can't they get it? That is already interesting. If they want, like I said this in the video, 6 questions. If I say to you, Julie wants to go to Spain for her vacation. The second I said that, a part of you was like, I wonder what's going to happen. Why is that going to be difficult? What is she going to learn? What is going to go wrong? 1,000 questions occurred to you. And that was out without even the obstacle. Just somebody wanting something. It's interesting. It just is. So then add an obstacle. Julie wants to go to Spain for her vacation, but she lives in a country that will not allow people to go to Spain. Now you got an obstacle. She's got to get out of her country into another country and into Spain through whatever means. Julie wants to go to Spain for her vacation, but she doesn't have any money. Now she's got a problem. Either can she go to Spain without money, or how can she get money? Either way, it's interesting. So that's why I really push those questions. Okay. Yes, I'm going to do that. I am going to put that, the Cheyenne is saying it would be a good follow-up to show the breakdown of the series in the overview. That is exactly what I will be presenting at the end of the step-by-step process. When I've finished it and I've thought through that stuff, I will write a document which gives a summary of the series with a rough idea of some of the main things that are going to happen. Plus, I've already got that document that I will show you. Okay. The season principles or thematic connections. Yes, that is what I'm doing. Okay. Hello, Angeli. Do you have any tips for how to keep the tone consistent throughout the screenplay? I usually look to my inspiration for guide, but I keep running into scenes that are hard to characterize right. That's an interesting question. Let me think about that. I think one of the questions is, what is tone? I would say that you have to remember that tone is a thing you set. In other words, there will come a moment when you're writing a script where you'll get one scene right. Sometimes you have that in advance. You say, I know what tone I want this to be. I want this to be exactly like The Hangover, or I want this to be exactly like The Philadelphia Story. These are remarkably different tones. Both are good. But the point is, by choosing your tone, by saying, I want this tone to be very verbal or very nonverbal. I want it to be very snarky, or I want it to be very sincere. Those tone elements are going to become set in a scene. You're going to write one scene where you're like, that's the tone I like. And then you start to use that to compare to others. What elements of this are working for me? What tone? Tone is such a mysterious thing. Tone is a mixture of the words you use, the behavior of the characters, the larger choices about plot and the world that you're in. Those are all creating the tone. So what I would say is the way that you lock in a tone is first to find it. First, you have to make that choice. It's not an easy or obviously apparent thing. You want to say, that's the tone. And you can just choose a tone from another movie and borrow it. By the time you're done with it, it will be your own. But you want to be able to say, what about this tone? What is the tone of the Philadelphia Story? Which is a lot of people wittily having discussions. That's how, and then you keep it consistent by, once again, you just go through it a lot. Hold on. Yeah, here's the main thing. You go over it and over it and over it. That's it. You can't get it all at once. You can never hold the whole thing in your head or on the page at once. You can only read one sentence at a time. You can only read one page at a time. So therefore, what you want to do is, if every time you go through the script, you focus on a different area, then you come back to another area and you go back and you go over and over and over it over the course of weeks and weeks and weeks. Eventually, you will smooth the tone, because you'll say, this scene, it's a little noisy. This scene's a little slow. Whatever it is, you do the tone piece by piece. You don't have an overall tone. You have a tone that you like in one scene, and then you gradually try to match it. The other thing you want to do in order to not be boring is you do want to vary your tone. You want to explore different aspects of your tone. You don't want it to be exactly the same all the time. Okay. Yes, exactly. Diego's right. Imagine getting very attached to an arc and the editor or showrunner says, toss it. That happens every day. That's the business. This is the business we have chosen. By the way, I'm writing my own book series, not TV writing, using TV structure just as a guide. Yeah, I got that. I think that's a great idea. The idea of writing a fiction, but using formatting from series so that each episode is a section of the book, or each episode is a book of a book series. Great idea. I heartily endorse that. I think that's a terrific thing to do. Basically, I was asking how to write it, if there's a special form for it. The audience can see it as a medieval world from the beginning. I think that the best thing to do is to try and, I forgot, did you say it's a script or a book? But the main thing is, no matter what, first of all, just tell them, say like, this is, you start it with like France, 1452. Everyone immediately will say, okay, now I know that it's in the medieval world. But then with everything you describe, this guy is walking around in a robe in a castle. It's the medieval time, or somebody's play acting. The important thing to do is there is no special form. The form you want to choose is once again, look at things like it and try to focus on, just remember that the main thing you want to do is establish the characters and their situation, and the world will be encountered that way. That's the main thing about world building, is you build the world by putting the characters in the world and having them have needs and obstacles in that world. Then you learn about that world as you go through it. You don't want to just plunk down the world. The world only exists for the characters. Cool. Very glad. Have you ever heard of a successful screenwriter and never bothered to learn the tools? Sure. I think that there's some people who absorb them unconsciously. If you just watch a lot of movies, like, you don't have to do any of this. You don't have to study a damn thing. If you just watch a lot of movies, you will absorb what you think the rules are. And there are many great writers who work that way. A lot of people will just say, like, I saw that, I see how that works, I can use those. So they are actually just finding their own tools from their experience of watching things. You do not need to go to a fancy school to learn screenwriting. You do not need to read any particular book to do it. I would just say read as many as you can, because you might grab some useful tricks. How do you pitch a script? That one is a little big. I'm not sure I can answer that now. Let me hang on to it and see. Yes, this is fine. This one, I have answered this like 3 or 4 times in other episodes. So I'm trying to think, if you go back through the other Ask Me Anythings, definitely. The answer is, you know what, I'm going to have to start. Hang on just a second. Shashwat, it's very nice to meet you, by the way. I don't think that we have met before. Let me see if I can very briefly find. I'm going to have to start keeping this up here. Okay, yes. What if the character... Okay, it was an AMA called What If My Character Doesn't Want Anything? And I will post the link in something. I will try to post the link down in the description later, but that will help you. I've already gone into that. Can a character change what they want during the story? I answered that in another AMA. The title of that one was What If My Character Doesn't Want Anything? So go through my playlists of Ask Me Anythings. You'll find one that's called What If My Character Doesn't Want Anything? That is where you want to be. Okay. Hello, Great Scott. Thank you so much for this. The perfect timing. You're welcome. And welcome to you. I started something. Question. Do we need to worry about keeping the voice style similar between chapters? Silly question from on chapter 2. No, that isn't a silly question. And no, you don't have to. You have to decide whether you want to. That's it. Do remember, one of the main things is, and this is really, really important, okay? Well, let me see if I can find my... here it is. Writing is making choices. So, for instance, William Faulkner thought it was an absolutely fine idea to have different chapters about different characters in radically different styles, in the voices of those characters, in The Sound and the Fury. You can decide to have different chapters in different styles. There's a guy named James Joyce who wrote a book named Ulysses. Every single chapter is in a radically different style. He did okay, although some people would say he didn't. The main thing is, it's certainly doable. Are you challenging your audience in some ways? Yes. Is there an audience that is going to like being challenged that way? Yes. Is that necessarily the mainstream audience? Don't know. We'll see. You'll find out. But the basic answer, Great Scott, is you certainly can change your style between chapters, or even, it's harder in Hollywood to change between like episodes or sections of a story, just because you have to deal with an awful lot of people with an awful lot of money riding on it, and they just get nervous that you will upset the audience, and so therefore they say, please don't do that. Okay, let's slow down on the questions because we're getting towards the end of the hour, and I do still have a couple of other things I wanted to mention. Do you have any tips how to write a story where there are two good guys, one of which will turn on the other, become the antagonist? Any films like this to study? There must be. You guys let me know if there's any that you can think of. Any tips on how to write that? I would just say the main tip is write all of your characters the same way. What do they want? Why can't they get it? What do they do about that? Those are the main things, those 6 questions. Good guy, bad guy, they all work the same way, which is they are trying to do something which you and hopefully the audience decide is the good guy thing or the bad guy thing. You have to decide what is it that makes the one who's the good guy, who stays a good guy, stay the good guy. And what is it about the bad guy? And then you have to decide when and how to reveal that that is a choice. The question of whether or not, there's so many stories like that. Also, there's the question of, is it that there are two good guys and one of them changes? Or are there two good guys but one of them turns out to be a bad guy undercover? Those are both possible stories, and they both would be great. So any films like this to study? Offhand, I can't come, like a lot are occurring to me, but I haven't really thought them through. So I can't answer that offhand, but it's a good question, and I hope other people will mention things. Following up on the obstacles of our stories, how do we avoid the second act lag? And our obstacles genre specific. I would say there are genre specific obstacles. Every genre will have certain. Well, wait a second. Obstacles to the writing or obstacles to the characters? Because that's an important difference. The answer is, like, for instance, obstacles to sci-fi, to writing sci-fi, difficulties of writing sci-fi, or you can get awfully heady if you're not careful, or you can get just hard to believe. Obstacles to writing, romantic comedies, you can get silly. But when do you decide to focus on internal versus external problems for the character? This is actually an interesting and good problem. I do not think it is important to differentiate between internal and external things of any kind. I don't get that. I know that a lot of writers, guides, and teachers will make a big deal. You have to have an external and an internal. Sometimes they're both. Sometimes something is like, the main thing is you want to make sure that whatever it is, you can see it from the outside. There's an internal obstacle still has to be expressed in an external way, and an external obstacle still has to have an internal meaning. So to me, it's all the same thing. Like the internal obstacle of, I am afraid to go out of my apartment and socialize, that would be an obstacle to many, many activities. How would we see that? See the movie Kimmy, where she's got agoraphobia for a very good reason. She's had traumatic events. So therefore, they show the difficulty she has living her life because she's not leaving the apartment. Internal obstacles have to be seen through something that's happening externally. Discussion, actions they have to take or actions they cannot take. External obstacles have to have an internal meaning. For instance, in the movie Rear Window, which is sort of a Kimmy from way back when, he is not stuck in his apartment because he's agoraphobic. He's stuck in his apartment because he's got a broken leg. And that is an internal obstacle for him because he is a guy who likes adventure. He's a photographer. He likes to get out. So that external obstacle, which is an internal obstacle of he's bored, has him start to look out his rear window at the other apartments, and next thing you know, we're in a great plot. And that is a great plot, by the way. Okay. Kirby, that's a good question, which I will answer in an episode about that. Sorry that you are asking a lot of questions that I am planning to answer in full in better ways. Oh, Angela likes my advice. Yay. Okay. All right. Let's stop asking questions now because we're getting down there. In descriptions about writing a suspenseful sequence is less more. Yeah, always in screenwriting, less is more. However, there are times that is not true. But in general, in screenwriting, less is always more. It is really good to find ways to condense, to remove, to have the things that you've got be powerful because they are spare. Yes, I really can't think of a time when that is not the case in terms of using words in screenplays. This is very important to say. We are talking not about less is more in terms of what happens. We're talking about less is more in terms of how many words you are using to describe it. And I would say overall, yeah, always less is more. Tavana, I am so glad. Tavana, I have your question. I keep wanting to answer it, which is that you asked me about the moment that I became a professional, and I keep never getting to it because people are asking so many questions. I'm probably going to just make that a full video in itself, but hang in there. I promise I will get to it. Okay. You're outlining your graphic novel at Paramount. That's fantastic. Congratulations, Tavana. I am so happy for you. Hi. And Great Scott, you are welcome. Okay. We're back to the two guys, the good guy and the bad guy. More specifically, if your real antagonist won't be actively antaging into your story until Act 3 because info changes motivation, how do you occupy? Well, there obviously has to be another thing going on. That one's pretty obvious. And if you think about it, most of the time, the question actually answers itself. If the person is not going to be the antagonist, let's just make this really clear. Not every story needs to have an antagonist. Antagonist is not important. Obstacle is important. Goal is important. If your goal is, I want to clean up this street, and you're trying to sweep it with a broom and cars are driving by, that can still be a perfectly great story. The important thing is that when people say there's got to be a protagonist and antagonist, obviously if you've got a story where one of your characters is going to become essentially the new antagonist in the last third, what you want to do is build a story where in the first 2/3, someone else is the antagonist or something else is the problem. And ideally, you want to connect those two things so that whatever happens to resolve that story kicks in this other, the new antagonist. Does that make sense? That's the answer, and it's a great one. The answer is you obviously need something else going on. Because when you say I have two good guys and one of them is going to get information and become a bad guy, well, A, what is that information? You want to spend some time setting that up. And B, what are they being good guys about? Clearly there's something happening. That's your story. And then that should feed into whatever the antagonist is going to antagonist about. But before then, these two, quote, good guys are doing something, right? Whatever they're doing, that's your antagonist. That's your story. If I don't finish, I don't get paid is a strong motivator. But any advice for a fellow retired guy, who can't seem to take seriously or stop busting his own deadlines on a project? Yes, I have advice about that. Several advice. First is this video, small steps. Because the truth is, the deadline isn't important. The steps you get to it are important. If you don't even think about the deadline, think about steps. Just say, I have 38 chapters I have to write. I have 60 scenes in this screenplay. If you just write one, and then write two, and then write three, eventually, if you just keep doing that, small steps, you will get all 60, and then you will have your deadline. The deadline is an artificial attempt to jump to the end. Don't even think about deadlines. Think about process. And towards that end, I would suggest that you also watch this video. Create a ritual, which is, in order to get those small steps done, there are lots of things that I talk about in that video about how to get your mind into the place where you comfortably can do that small step. But that's actually the answer. Forget about deadlines. Deadlines are an artificial thing, which, yes, you may have to figure out your process within an artificial deadline, but the deadline isn't the process. Focus on the process, the deadline will happen. Okay. Just going to try and grab some of these. Okay. Matthew, I've written the first draft of my latest screenplay, but it has no theme. Does a story have to include a theme? Is a theme a necessity? Interestingly, I have done a video called Theme, in which I absolutely answer that question in brilliant detail. These videos, the reason I'm pointing to these videos is because that's where I've got the answer right. That's where I figured out the best way to say it and tried to say it in a really concise, powerful, competent way. Right now, I'm just babbling, and I would not trade what I am saying now for something in any of those videos. So when it comes to theme, watch that video, Theme. And also, if you have a question for me, you should be checking out my videos. You'll be amazed what you will find there. The whole point of my doing this channel is not to do the live streams. The live streams are a way to get interest in people watching those videos, because that's where I did my work to teach you. That's where the teaching happens. That's the good stuff. Not a problem. Not a problem at all. It was a good question with a good lesson. I am so good and gracious about answering. Yay! Okay, I hear you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, yeah, just keep going. Keep going. It's in there. Good. Okay. Yeah, excellent. Let them be different. Like I said, look at Ulysses. Ulysses goes all in on the different chapters. Hello, Donna. Hello, welcome. I hope all is well in Australia. You are welcome with your drum. Rotatum-tum. Oh, yes, that's right. Okay, yeah, Anakin. Anakin in Star Wars, I think, would count as a guy who starts out as a good guy and becomes a bad guy. Although there is, well, the question becomes, was he really good even when he was a kid? And I would say yes, he was. He was, but boy, do you see it coming. Obstacles to the character assignment. Yeah. And the answer is, I forget the question. Hold on, I'm going back. During obstacles, yes. Okay. The answer is, I really would suggest you check out this one. This is where I talk a lot about obstacles. And the main thing about obstacles is if you've got obstacles to the characters, you are not going to be bored. If the obstacles are irrational or de-escalating, if they're getting easier, it'll get a little boring. But I think your instincts would be, that's not good. You know, that's the thing. Follow your instincts. Think, would I be bored watching this? That's the main thing. I mean, honestly, the main thing you guys have got to remember at all times is, would I be bored watching this? If you are the first audience. Cool. All right. Yes. Excellent. Yeah. Well, it's very important also to remember, we're not talking about finished films. We are talking about scripts, and less is more in scripts. I do not have a favored style. I like more is more sometimes. I like more is more, less is more sometimes when it comes to finished films. I am talking about scripts particularly. Scripts just need to be sparse. They need to be fast. Okay. Off topic. I need your help as the help of the whole gang. What does a traditional American breakfast include? This seems like one that Google would help, but I would say many people have eggs, either scrambled or fried, bacon and toast, or what they call hash brown potatoes, or home fried potatoes. Those are all very American. Donuts are a real American breakfast. A traditional American breakfast is often bacon and eggs of some form, pancakes or waffles sometimes. Those are all, that is way off topic, but it wasn't hard to answer. Yeah, finish your homework. There you go. Bacon, eggs, maybe pancakes, maybe toast, maybe home fries, or maybe hash browns. There you go. Or if you don't want bacon, sausage is another good one. Okay, cool. Yep, they do. It's going to help a lot. Good. Okay. I'm Canadian. I guess. So eggs, toast, cereal, orange juice. Yeah. Grits is a specifically Southern American. So there we go. So I've answered a bunch of questions and once again failed to answer the questions that I intended. Yeah, that makes sense. I get that. Okay, well, you got our answer. Like when I think, if I was going to see a movie and people were going to have a traditional American breakfast, that's what it would be. Well, yeah, I think we're gonna stop here because I made it to the end of the chat. How cool is that? We have more questions for another day because I still haven't gotten to Devana's great question about what's it like to become a full-time professional writer, which is a great question. And that's where we are. And the kids and animals thing. I'll get to that maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day. Nice. Great to see all you guys. Go write something.